Hello and welcome to Paul on Politics, our regular review of all the political news and analysis in Kent, live on KMTV. Well, if 2017 was a turbulent year in politics, 2018 seems to be shaping up in much the same way. It began with a cabinet reshuffle which left many observers to shrug their shoulders and ask, is that all there is? And former leader of UKIP Nigel Farage declared he was warming to the idea of a second EU referendum. With us in the studio to reflect on all this and other issues are Martin Wybrow, the first ever Green County Councillor in Kent, and Thanet Labour County Councillor Karen Constantine. Before we begin, here's Louisa Britton with a roundup of the shake-up at Westminster.
Quick recap of 2017. Theresa May lost 3 ministers in a couple of months. The Defence Secretary and Sevenoaks MP Michael Fallon left after he admitted that his behaviour towards women in the past had fallen short. And Ashford MP Damien Green quit his post in the Cabinet Office after he admitted to lying about the discovery of pornographic images on his computer during a police raid in 2008. Add to that, the International Development Secretary Priti Patel had to quit over unofficial meetings with Israelis. The Prime Minister thought it was time for a change. Now, in a statement, Theresa May said that she wanted to build a country fit for the future. The reshuffle helps us do just that by bringing fresh talent to the government. So let's do a quick head count. All the big cheeses keep their jobs. Amber Rudd stays on as Home Secretary. Philip Hammond will still be Chancellor. David Davis remains Brexit Secretary and Boris Johnson will still be Foreign Secretary. New to the table is David Liddington, who takes over from Ashford MP Damien Green in the Cabinet Office. How did Kent MPs get on? Let's have a look. As expected, the Chatham and Aylesford MP Tracy Crouch remains as Sports Minister, but not as expected. Tunbridge Wells MP Greg Clark will remain the Business Secretary, a job that the Prime Minister had wanted to hand to the Health Secretary Jeremy Hunt. The MP for Gillingham and Rainham, Raymond Shishty, has been appointed as Vice Chairman for Communities at Conservative's Central Office. His job will be to look after party membership and attract newcomers from more diverse backgrounds. He'll be working alongside the Maidstone and Weald MP Helen Grant. Last but not least, newcomer Kelly Tolhurst MP, who was elected in 2015, has been appointed to the Whip's office. This means all 3 Medway MPs now have jobs in the government.
Well, Karen, it was billed as a major shake-up, but the actuality was that it wasn't terribly much and there weren't more women put into government.
Yeah, well, we were all waiting to see what would happen, and in the end it sort of petered out into not very much of a reshuffle at all. And it's always disappointing, I think, in in government and in public institutions, where you've got less than 50-50 representation. I think it should be a sort of.
Are you in favour of quotas for this kind of thing? Shouldn't it be up to the government to decide, the Prime Minister to decide who he or she wants in their government? Yeah,
jobs should always be merit-based, there's no doubt about that, but there are quite a lot of very good women around who don't get the opportunity. So quotas are sometimes the only way that you can even up a playing field. So, why not use quotas if that gives us... And don't forget what we benefit from that. We benefit from that diversity dividend, is we get much more access to a bigger pool of human capital and brains.
But, Theresa May is saying, she recognises these issues and she's appointed new chairman and vice chairman in the Conservative Party to attract people from more diverse backgrounds. That's a good step, isn't it?
Might be a good step. I suppose time will tell. I mean, what she said she was going to do, which was a fundamental reshuffle at the top end of the cabinet, she didn't achieve. So, for instance, it looks to me like she's out of control, that she's not the leader, but she's the manager there. For instance, with Hunt, she didn't manage to move Hunt into another position, and I think that was an ambition that she wanted to achieve, and she failed.
Well,
so actually, who was in charge?
Let's hear from Ray Chishti, because he's one of these new people managing the party and trying to encourage more members. So let's hear what he had to say about it.
We have a phenomenal support out there, but do we have to go out there, engage more, listen more, and get more people to come out and support the Conservative Party? The answer is, of course it is, because at the end of the day, it would be wrong to sit back and say, we're now in government, that's it. No, we have to go out there, we have to engage, we have to listen, we have to get more people involved in politics and supporting our great party.
Well, Martin, all parties want to increase their membership, don't they? And you could say, actually, the Green Party perhaps not as successful in terms of people moving over to Labour. Is that a fair summation?
I don't think that is particularly what has happened. I think all political parties are struggling to re-energise, reconnect with people.
Does that mean they're not interested in politics?
I think there is a challenge for all parties to make politics more relevant to people, and so I think that is across the board. And you can see just from that clip there, the Conservative Party in particular really struggling because of the demographic of their membership. I think they can see into the pretty near future as to sort of where they're heading, and it is pretty bleak. So you have got them now rushing around trying to broaden their appeal, a lot of it very, very superficial, I would say. But I think you just look at how their membership is shrinking in particular, and you look at what is happening in politics as a whole and the breakdown of this sort of old-fashioned type of politics, and you can see fragmentation.
But at the same time, you also have the phenomenon that is momentum and the Corbynistas, you know, which does show that there is interest in there, maybe just not interest in the main political parties.
Yeah.
You know,
well, I mean, Momentum is part of our main political party. You know, it's integrated into the
I think
party.
the interesting thing for Momentum is, do you think they'll be able to sustain that level of support and interest right up to the election in 2020?
I would put money on that happening. I mean, I think we've got a group of people there that are incredibly dedicated. Their imaginations have been fired up. They've painted a picture of a future that really appeals to them, you know, so that's about self-determination and about influencing the way forward. And I think they're dictating to us, you know, how policy needs to change. And of course they're completely engaged with that and they want to see that change. I mean, I think that's all around us.
Martin, does it matter for Kent as an important county, an important area, that it doesn't have representation at the top of the government now? We've lost Michael Fallon, we've lost Damien Green.
Yes.
We've hung on to Greg Clark, but we don't have much representation really at the top level now.
It's not ideal, and obviously there have been some big casualties there, and Kent has been sort of making the headlines, Kent MPs, for all the wrong reasons. Like Karen, I'm very underwhelmed by the reshuffle that happened. I think everything that Theresa May touches goes wrong, and this reshuffle was a case in point where she couldn't get the changes that she wanted. Jeremy Hunt being an absolute case in point, where he actually ends up with a bigger portfolio than he had previously, despite the gross incompetence.
Maybe that's the way to get ahead, but we've got to move on. And closer to home, of course, there's been a slightly more interesting reshuffle at County Hall. The politician in charge of transport, Councillor Matthew Balfour, lost his job and faced inevitable speculation that it was because of the controversy over plans to cut funding for 70 bus services around the county. So controversial were the plans that the leader of the County Council, Paul Carter, announced late last year he was taking charge. Here's what he had to say at the end of last year.
I think that the publication of the list of routes was premature, and I am sorry that it has caused people understandable concern. Because of that, I am making a personal pledge to handle the forthcoming programme of negotiations with our bus operators to try to persuade them to keep a significant number of the routes going without subsidy, which I believe they should be able to do. I plan to meet Arriva and Stagecoach before Christmas, and in addition and in advance of the public consultation, I will also be meeting the smaller bus operators and bus providers to discuss the routes at risk and how they could potentially help us to reduce the impact if the bigger companies choose to remove some of their services.
Well, Martin, a lot of political intrigue around this decision, but I guess for people who rely on these services, the important thing is what happens next, and what do you think should happen next?
Well, I think you can see from what Paul Carter said towards the end of last year that there was an immediate backlash and there was some rowing back. We're waiting to sort of see the detail of the proposed budget, but I would expect... But
you're not going to see that, are you? Because the consultation that was planned for Monday is in limbo, as I understand.
That's right, but we will see what is going to be proposed for the cuts overall. So my expectation is that there will be a rowing back on this. That contribution from Paul Carter at full council clearly looked as though it was nothing like a vote of confidence for Matthew Balfour, and sure enough, on the same day as the central government reshuffle, we had our little one. I think that the cabinet member for environment and transport is a bit like the England football manager's job. It never ends well. It's an enormous remit. Things do fall between the cracks, and this whole bus, social necessary bus service fiasco is, I think, almost certainly what did pave do for Matthew.
Well, Karen, I mean, the challenge facing Kent County Council, like all county councils, they're not getting enough government money, so they're left with these invidious choices. What would you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the bus service is a bit like the NHS service. Chickens are coming home to roost. So you've got the voters of the Tory county councillors who are complaining to their county councillors about the service, and the MPs, and they're not happy with the service. But I mean, I think underlying all of this is, why are we running a bus service for profit? Why don't we think about running our own bus services and actually ploughing the profit that is made, which is substantial, back into running better bus services? Because we need less cars on the road. We need more people on buses of all different sizes. We could have a better ambition, so we could be greener, we could be more environmentally friendly, and we could take the profit motive out, which makes eminent sense.
That sounds very much like a green manifesto for public transport. I mean,
well, I think that
the council doesn't have pots of money at its disposal, does it? That's the problem.
It doesn't, but it was so badly managed. I think that is the real problem, because KCC shouldn't have waited until we were at the cliff edge before actually looking to do something. If you look around the rest of the country, even at our sort of neighbouring county councils, there are far more community bus services, for instance. We have done nothing to nurture them. It's no good sort of getting right to that breaking point where, because of the ever reduced central government funding, we have to make these horrible decisions, and then throw your hands up in horror and say we've got to make these difficult cuts.
But it's investing,
there was a lot of risk mitigation that could have gone on beforehand. So I think that was the real problem.
We're going to in danger of missing our own bus if we don't move on. So thank you very much. When we come back, we'll be considering what has become known as the blue planet effect on politics, and whether anyone apart from Nigel Farage wants a second referendum on leaving the EU. Don't go away. Welcome back to Paul on Politics with our guests Karen Constantine and Martin Whybrow. Now, it was David Cameron who first tried to establish the Conservatives as the Green Party and urged us to hug not just a hoodie but a husky. 10 years later, and Theresa May has set out her own environmental agenda, declaring a war on plastic and announcing charges for plastic bags. We asked residents in Maidstone whether they forget their bags and end up paying 5p, a bit like me.
No, I always bring my own. Out of principle, I refuse to pay 5p for a plastic bag, but it is also, we recycle a lot as well, so we're environmentally conscious as well.
No.
Any reason why?
I've got a backpack. I have had for 2 years, so I don't use pay 5p a bags ever.
No, not really. I tend to hold on to bags that I get and reuse it.
When I forget to take my own or buy something on impulse and I haven't got the bag with me.
Just now and again, that's all. We use them really to put recycling stuff down in the bins, down in Tesco's. That's the only time we use them.
We don't. We normally take our own because we're totally fed up with all this plastic being strewn about the countryside and wrecking the environment.
Yes, I do.
Any particular reason why?
Well, normally I've got loads of bags in the car, and like a lot of people, we forget to take them in. So I don't object, but I do recycle it. So I put all my bits and pieces in, I use it, then put it in a black bag.
Well, Martin, admittedly, the Conservatives haven't done much on the green agenda recently, but at least Theresa May is setting out a kind of platform. You've got to be encouraged by that, haven't you?
I suppose you clutch at straws would be the best way of defining it.
Recyclable straws.
Good, absolutely not one-off plastic straws, yes. I think that on the one hand, at least there is some sort of mention now of the environment, and it would be great to have that at Kent County Council, because boy, could we do with it there. At the same time, it was very vague. The devil will be in the detail. It's all very well talking about supermarket aisles without plastic, and you know, how do you actually achieve that?
Not underpinned by any legislation. So
I think that is the problem. Where is the sort of teeth behind these words? There was no deposit scheme on plastic bottles. I think that was very disappointing. I think you also have to be judged by your actions, and so a government that on the one hand starts to talk about the environment is all well and good, but then if you try to build a lower Thames crossing, if you are talking about a new runway at Heathrow, pro-fracking, which is fossil fuel. You know, you've got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, and I think there's a massive way for this government to go before anybody will really be taken in by its green credentials, and, you know, David Cameron's hugging a husky will actually be turned anything other than false words.
I mean, the decision to charge for plastic bags has been successful, hasn't it? I mean, and it makes sense to roll it out to all other retailers.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I think that is a no-brainer, that it has been hugely successful. It shows the power of government to bring about change, and before that you look at the landfill tax, that was a very successful policy. So although, as we saw on that clip there, you know, consumers are changing, consumers are now remembering to take their reusable bags, you do often need government to step in for big sweeping changes.
It's like
and we
nudge
don't
politics, as they call it.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Karen, what is it that councils need to do more of to, you know, improve recycling and be greener? Because, you know, this seems to move the onus onto the individual, you know, in terms of using recyclable straws, etc. I
mean, the problem with this is that it isn't underpinned by a proper act, and the World Wildlife Foundation and the RSPB were very critical of it. So, and also, it's what you say, it's the devil's in the detail. So what sort of budget allocation is there towards this? Because there is a lot of councils can do to encourage residents and, you know, to improve areas, such as, I mean, down in Thanet, what we do, well, we have a very precious coastline, but what we do there is we all make an attempt to keep our beach clean. So that's a good thing for people to do, you know, it gets them out and about, etc. But actually we need a more fundamental shift. We need some bigger, more ambitious green policies. You know, we need to move towards that a lot faster than we are. I think this is a bit paper thin, actually.
The supermarket chains are being encouraged to set up plastic-free aisles, and they are big influencers, aren't they? So, I mean, that's to be encouraged, surely.
Well, it is, but I just sort of struggle to understand how that actually gets sort of put into practice. It's all very well for the Prime Minister to talk about it as an aspiration, but unless you have the stick as well as the words, then I think it's just going to be that people will forget about it a bit like they forget about David Cameron hugging huskies. It will become just something else
symbolic.
That the Conservative Party did to try and give a green sheen to the party as a whole. But then they also really do need to actually look at the fundamental policies, such as an additional Heathrow runway.
And it is a little bit cynical, isn't it, to do this now to appeal to the younger voter?
Well, yes, that's an interesting point. Do you think underlying this, is there an attempt to kind of connect with kind of younger voters?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is now at Tory HQ a real angst about the real shrinking of their membership base, and so they are starting, I think we will see more of this, they are starting to think, right, crikey, what can we do to appeal to younger people, to appeal to people outside of our traditional base, to actually, at the end of the day, probably keep the Tory party with a future. But I don't think anyone is going to be won over at the moment with this sort of announcement that was made yesterday, which has got no substance to it, really.
So for you, is it a matter of underpinning it with law, statutory obligations? That
is it. I think there are the two things. Firstly, you actually have to give some substance to this and talk about how you're going to achieve it, not just a vague aspiration. And then secondly, you have to underpin the rest of what you do as government to really show your own leadership. Fracking is an absolute case in point. No government that was serious about the environment would be absolutely pursuing taking more fossil fuels out of the ground. We are never going to meet the Paris Agreement if we carry on along that sort of line.
You know, why don't we have an ambition to look at what we could do with wave power? Why aren't we doing more to do, sort of, as you're saying, fundamentally much greener, much cleaner energy? Why aren't we investing
what this government
in that?
did with the feed-in tariff as well, and just chop that industry, which was starting to grow so well.
OK, well, we've got to end there, and it's left me no time to ask if you've ever brought a cauliflower slice wrapped in cling film. Well, Brexit is never far away from domestic policies, and Nigel Farage set hairs running this week with an admission that he was warming to a second referendum. That didn't go down too well with his own party and many Conservative MPs. Here's what they had to say.
I was really surprised to hear Nigel Farage calling for a second referendum. It slightly sounds like he's trying to get back in the headlines.
It's a nonsense. We've had a referendum. We had a referendum on 26th of June last year, and at that time the British public decided what they want to do, and it is, once again, it's patronising for some people to say they didn't understand what they were voting for. They understood very well what they were voting for. Why would we then go back? They want to leave the EU. That's what we should be doing. There's no point having another referendum.
Okay, Gordon, thank you very much. Martin, are you in agreement with these MPs who are saying it's a nonsense and, you know, let's just get on with it?
I think I'm in an agreement with them on the basis of who's actually saying it. You know, I think Nigel Farage has achieved.
Oh, you mean if somebody else said it, it might be acceptable?
I think he's saying it for the wrong reasons. I think Nigel Farage has achieved what Nigel Farage wants to do, which is actually to have us talking about him again. Yeah. He was saying that if we had another referendum, he thought it would be a landslide leave vote. I don't think it would be anything of the sort, frankly. The Green Party policy is to have a referendum on the final agreement that's on the table, but I don't think that's where Nigel Farage was coming from. I think Nigel Farage was coming from the point of view of, you know, the brand of Nigel Farage, basically.
Karen, Martin's very clear about what the Green position is. Some people are a bit confused what Labour's position is.
Well, I think one of the issues is that I think a lot of people do feel that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. You know, people fell into two camps, 17,000 to leave and 17 million to leave and 16 million to stay. I think people were very confused over a promise of 350 million back into the weekly back into the NHS, and that's not happened. I think people were told that it would be easy to secure deals elsewhere. I don't think people thought long and hard enough about where we actually do our trade. So most of our trade is across Europe, it is across the Channel. I don't think people thought about the hard, soft border.
Are you personally in favour of the single customs union? I mean, is that something?
I believe in democracy. I voted myself to remain. I was passionate about remaining. I still want to consider myself as a European. However, the vote went the other way, so I accept the vote. I think whatever happens when we get to the point where we've got deals on the table to look at, I think we need to make sure that that is fully scrutinised. And I have to say, I think that particular individual has just got a habit of throwing bombs into the middle of things to create smoke screens, and it's not helpful to any of us. I think we're all really keen to make sure that we get the best outcome under whatever circumstances we've got.
Martin, the best outcome under any circumstances, that's, you know, that's the only option, isn't it, really?
Well, I think the custom union, particularly for us here in Kent, is absolutely key, because I think people are now starting to realise the detail behind what the implications would be if we come out of the customs union. And the gridlock potentially that you would have in this county, it is worrying to see sort of what Highways England are starting to talk about in terms of the M20 in particular, if we've got a hard Brexit, because those lorries, you know, 11,200 per day, they will stack up very, very quickly, and I think we will see reduced capacity on the M20, and that will ultimately damage the economy.
Well, unless they build a big lorry park.
Well, that would never have worked, and it was flawed right from the start. There was just a dumb idea, which I hope is now completely dead in the water.
Okay, well, that's time against us, I'm afraid. That's the end of this week's show. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you soon. Thanks for watching.